I want to look at moving from duality and judgment to wholeness and compassion. And if you know me, you know that I like to look at both the micro and the macro. So looking at the individual and the collective. And I think if we look to the external world and we look at the collective, we see that we're still in a tremendous amount of duality and judgment. But as within, so without, right? So everything starts from within us. And if we are creating separation within us, if there is judgment within us, if we're trying to get rid of certain parts of us, or we hate certain parts of us, or we're at war with parts of us, it's no wonder that the collective reflects that in a way. So as always, I like to go into the internal process and journey, but just know that when you do the inner work, you have a ripple effect on the collective. So the more work you do within yourself and the more that you can come to a place of peace and equilibrium and love and compassion within yourself, that will change the world. So many people are like, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. How can I change the world? You change the world by changing yourself. And when I say change yourself, I don't mean it's because you're a bad person and you need to become better. We are walking around often very wounded and scared and at the mercy of our triggers and our belief systems. And so what we're needing is loving attention to create healing and come back to wholeness. We're not broken. We just need to come back to wholeness, which is who we innately are. So that's what we're going to dive into today. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So when I say that we're often walking around very wounded, it's very easy to immediately go to a judgment. You might have heard that and been like, I don't like that. I don't like what Corinne is saying. And there's a judgment or there's a defense around it. And this is what we need to kind of, destigmatize in a way that we have this association that if we have wounding within us, that we are a broken, flawed person and something must be wrong with us. And this is why we need to fix ourselves or get rid of that part. We need to get rid of this wounding part. We need to get rid of our trauma. We need to get rid of these parts of us that we don't like and that we hate. And that is just not the way that it works. Firstly, if we come at it with that judgment that there is something wrong with our wounding, I don't want to say we've already lost the game because, of course we can go in and do the loving work and help bring healing to this part of us. But it's almost like if we go immediately to, this is something that we have to get rid of, we're coming at it from the wrong approach. So when I say that we're walking around wounded, what I mean by that is that part of being human is that we experience some kind of wounding. And what I mean by that is that, you could say that it's like the moment that we come into this world and we are so connected. We're so connected to source, whatever you want to call it, source, God, universe, love, consciousness. We are connected to our parents and our caretakers. We really, as babies, embody that just pure love. And then as the child develops, it starts to recognize, I'm not merged with my parents. I'm actually individuating. And I'm feeling that separation, which is, I'm not going to go too far into this, but, it would be that's a whole other kind of rabbit hole that you can go down in the realm of spirituality of that separation is an illusion. But here we are in this realm, in a dualistic realm, where separation feels very real, right? So as a part of that, you could say, okay, there's this kind of just innate wounding that occurs as we recognize or feel, oh my God, I feel separate. I feel disconnected from source. I feel disconnected from my parents. I could be alone. I could be abandoned. I could be rejected. I could be unloved. And then the survival instinct comes in I will not survive because I cannot survive without my parents. Then you throw in that all of us have a childhood. We all have a childhood, and our parents were also just humans themselves, trying their best, dealing with their own trauma, dealing with their own wounding. My point is we just have to recognize that part of being human is that we get hurt. We misunderstand things. We take things personal. We create beliefs, especially as children, because we're very center focused in ways, I don't like using this word, but in ways as children, we're kind of narcissistic from the perspective that we don't know how to yet think beyond ourselves. Children might be very intuitive and emotionally attuned in a way, very much so actually, but the mind hasn't yet developed to understand what is yours and what is mine, what is about you and what is about me, how to not take things personal. So the child will often think if the parent isn't showing up because whatever, they don't have the capacity, or they're stressed, or maybe they're in trauma or PTSD, or maybe they're depressed, or maybe they're overworked, or maybe they're unhappy in their relationship, or God knows what is going on. As the child, we don't know what's happening for our parent. And so the way that they show up and communicate and talk to us or give us attention or not give us attention, the child will go, oh, but that's about me. So if my parent isn't showing up for me and they're not showing me love and affection and care and compassion and empathy, something must be wrong with me. And there's the wounding. And if we don't grow up and become adults and look at this part of us as just a part of us that didn't receive the love that it needed. And we can't even go into the blame of our parents because, like I said, they were human trying their best. And, maybe in past times there hasn't been a whole lot of consciousness around how our childhood affects the rest of our lives. So it's relatively, quote unquote, new to have what's called conscious parenting. And I don't even like to place labels because, there's a lot of judgment that can go with that as well. So I think what this comes back to is just to know that we're human. And part of being human is that we get hurt. We're very sensitive. We are vulnerable. We are innately vulnerable. That's not weakness. It's actually a beautiful thing. But in that, there's this real interesting dance between our hearts are incredibly powerful. I think one of the most powerful parts of our being. And yet our hearts can also get really hurt. And so much about self-care and self-love is about tending to our heart, not creating barriers and walls and defending and closing off because that is a false sense of safety and protection. But tending to our heart is, how does my heart feel in this moment? What is it? What do I need? And how to remember to come back to a place of love within ourselves. So if we go into duality, we live in a very dualistic realm. Things are very black and white, good, bad, right, wrong, left, right, there. And also because we are in a habit of labeling things, we over-identify with the duality. I'm this or I'm that. You're that and I'm this, so therefore we're different. And if you don't do what I do and you don't like what I do or I don't like what you do, there's the conflict, there's the judgment, there's the war. And that goes the same within ourselves. We say positive and negative emotions. I don't like those terms because it just automatically insinuates that there's good and bad, that there's right and wrong, that some emotions are good and fine to have and some emotions are bad. And if you have those emotions, then you have to get rid of them or something is wrong with you. Do you see how it's just laced with judgment? Whereas we are a human being, we have a spectrum of emotions, just like there's a spectrum of color. Look at the rainbow. I've used this analogy for like over a decade now, that you can prefer a color, but you cannot say another color is bad. I like blue. I can't say yellow is bad and blue is better than yellow. They're two different colors. So with our emotions, certain emotions might make us feel uncomfortable. They might be challenging, but they're not innately bad or evil. What becomes quote unquote bad is when we're not holding them with consciousness and awareness, when we're not listening to them, when we're not recognizing, oh, this is a messenger within me that is indicating, that is telling me that there's something deeper going on. Anger is often the loudest alert, because the loudest messenger, because we didn't hear the sadness. We didn't hear when we weren't showing up authentically. We didn't hear when we weren't taking care of ourselves. We didn't hear when somebody stepped over our boundaries, or we didn't place them because we weren't taking care of ourselves. Do you see what I mean? Like there's so many layers underneath. And so we have a lot of judgment towards anything that's not happy and fine all the time. How are you? Fine. Bullshit. Fine is not a good human answer. It's never that black and white. It's never that simple. Also, we can have simultaneously opposing experiences within ourselves, contradicting experiences. I feel really grateful for this in my life, but this feels really challenging and I feel really sad. Both are possible, right? So, excuse me. Being in a kind of society that is highly dualistic and is really identified with the black and the white, with the labels, it just brews. It's just a recipe for judgment and conflict and hatred, actually. Because the thing is the heart isn't dualistic in that way. The heart, if this is why I so focus on drop into your heart. Because whatever you're feeling, thinking, and experiencing, if you hold it within your heart can hold it all without judgment. That is the nature of love. Love is like the ultimate open, embracing mama arms that say, I love you no matter what. I can hold your anger. I can hold your despair. I can hold your jealousy. I can hold your anxiety. I can hold your fear. I can hold your not knowing. I can hold your insecurity. I can hold it all and I still love you. That is unconditional love. Now, on a side note, because I can maybe predict where some people might go, unconditional love also knows what healthy boundaries are. So I don't mean that unconditional love is you become a doormat or you put up with abuse and toxic behavior and people just showing up as assholes, right? I'm not excusing that at all. Love might say, oh, they're in their wounding right now. They are so far removed from their inner home and they really need loving attention. But it's also not your job to fix them or heal them or save them. Right? We can have compassion and also put the healthy boundary, which to me, healthy boundaries aren't a line of defense. They're a line of self-care, like a golden bubble of light. That is anything within this is sacred. And this is how I take care of myself. So if you're overstepping the boundary and you're coming at me with aggression and without respect and compassion, I get to say, no, you cannot treat me like that. No, I will not put up with that. If you're going to speak to me in that way, or if you're going to treat me in that way, I have the choice to leave. Now, on the greater world stage, again, the macro, nowadays with cancel culture, it's just like there's no even opportunity to resolve conflict and be in diversity. We are naturally diverse. In some ways, we're all very similar because we share this human experience. But in other ways, we're also very unique and different, especially because we live in a world where there's different countries and different cultures. Different countries have different cultures. I don't want to go into how belief systems create a lot of division, but they do, whether they're spiritual, religious, or otherwise. A lot of very strong kind of dogmatic belief systems create division in the very fabric of how they're the way that they're institutionalized, I should say. Because I think if we boil everything back down to its source and its core, I do believe that at the core of that is love. Because I think love is at the core of all creation. So, but let's bring it back in a little bit. When you see that in the macro, there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of intolerance for differences, different views, different opinions, different ideologies, different philosophies, and we get stuck in the label and the identification with that label. You are this, they are that, they are different, they do not get along. No, because what's happening is we're not seeing the human being that actually is the truth rather than the label. When we see the human being, we can drop into compassion because we recognize they are no different than I. The labels might be different, the belief systems might be different, but the human is a human, right? And so there is a similarity there. So, but if we get caught in the duality and the parts that are good and bad, the judgment comes in. So bringing it into ourselves and into the micro, if you believe that a certain emotion is good and a certain emotion is bad, what are you going to do with the quote unquote negative emotion? You're going to try and cancel it. You're going to try and get rid of it. You're going to speak to it in a really bad way. A lot of people, their inner talk is very cruel. It's mean. So then look at the outer world. It's really easy for people to be mean to others because they're being mean to themselves. When you drop into your heart and you begin to cultivate that unconditional love that can hold everything and accept everything as it is without judgment, and then it's about embracing. So I'm not saying that you accept these parts and then that's it. It doesn't change. There might need to be parts of you that you work on. There might be parts of your behavior that you need to work on. Now, on a side note, your behavior doesn't mean that you're worthy or not worthy of love. You are always innately worthy of love. You are always innately significant. You belong. There's meaning in your existence. The problem is that we have created the connection that you are what you do. You are what you think. If you're not successful, then you're not worthy. If you're not in a relationship, then you're unlovable. The two aren't connected. This is where I'm saying we're innately whole. We just get disconnected from that. We begin to feel fragmented because what we do is we go inside and we begin to sever parts of ourselves. And we compartmentalize parts of ourselves. That part isn't good, so I want to get rid of it. Here's the joke. There is no away. You're just storing it in a part of you that we call the shadow because you don't want to look at it. It's in the darkness of who you are. And yet it's there, and it's most definitely, especially if we're not seeing it consciously and aware with awareness, it's acting out still. It's not, there is no away. We cannot turn a blind eye. So this is why going in and firstly having to accept that this is what is, this is what's here. And without judgment, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing bad, there's nothing evil or something wrong with you, or that you're broken, that you have fear and anxiety and insecurity, and you have these beliefs and the story that goes with those beliefs that you're not good enough and you're not worthy and you're not lovable because otherwise you would be in a relationship or you'd be treated well or you would be successful in your work or whatever the story is. But when we understand that we are innately whole and worthy and lovable, and we just tend to the parts that need our loving attention. When we drop into our heart and we begin to cultivate that level of compassion and acceptance, that it doesn't matter what arises within our experience, it's like, okay, that's okay. All right, right now I feel really scared. Right now, I feel really insecure. Right now, I feel terrified that that person is going to leave me. Right now, I feel like that abusive person is just the only love that I can get, and it makes me feel like shit, but I'm going to hold on to it, but I feel terrible about it, and what's wrong with me? Even that, it's okay. I'm here for you. I love you. And I'm going to show up so that I can show you that I'm here. My presence is what matters. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to reject you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to abuse you. When you start cultivating that relationship with yourself and you're living from heart and you recognize that you don't judge yourself so much anymore, it becomes impossible to do that to others without feeling the pain of it if you do it. You know how kind of in the beginning, some people can get really, I say in the beginning, I don't know why I said that. Maybe in the beginning of when you do, before you kind of go do this work, people can be really addicted to gossip. That can make them feel really good. Like, oh, gossiping about this person, what's going on in their life. And did you know? And this and that and the other. And, you're kind of speaking really meanly and rudely about them and maybe patronizing and just, it's not nice, right? But people can get really addicted to that kind of, vibration, way of being. But when you start cultivating self-awareness and you start dropping into your heart and you accept and you hold and you love and you have compassion and you get out of the good and the bad and you really, the main thing is you're letting go of judgment. If you go back and do that kind of behavior where you're gossiping and speaking behind people's back in a bad way, you're going to leave, like maybe you have a momentary satisfaction in it and you're going to leave feeling really like shit. And the more you do this work for years upon years, you just can't do it. Now, we all have judgment. I think to just have zero judgment is pretty saintly. It's pretty advanced. We all have judgment. Even if it's like, the driver on the road that we get angry at. There's an element of judgment in that. So again, we just got to accept that like we're human. And so you recognize, oh, okay, I was in a place of judgment. And what it becomes is returning back home to heart. We may stray away a little bit, but like how often can we come back to heart? So when we're not trying to be in the pursuit of being perfect specimens, that it's like, okay, I'm going to do this work to get rid of this part of myself. Because that part is wrong and bad and shameful, and without it, I will be a whole person. No. You go in lovingly and you embrace all of these parts that you don't like. It feels counterintuitive. You do not push them away. You bring them towards. You hold them. You listen to them. You love them. You accept them. And through your love, you alchemize and transmute that part of you. It's not about getting rid of, but this is the change, is you no longer live from your wounding anymore because your wounding finally feels loved. It finally feels held, finally feels not alone. It feels connected. It has your presence there. And I might have shared this in a podcast before. Maybe this is something I brought up with clients. I really like this process of, it's something to really think about when we're thinking about relationship and dating, the process of dating. But I think it's absolutely applicable to our relationship with ourselves because, again, everything starts within. The first thing that we're looking at is getting to know the person. So get to know yourself. Do the things and the practices where you get to really know who you are. Who are you without the identity of ... Who are you when you're not doing this, that, and the other? Who are you? Then you show up with that part with yourself. And what we're looking for is consistency. How consistent am I in the way that I show up with myself? Am I kind? Am I loving? Or am I judgmental? Am I mean? Sometimes am I nice? Sometimes am I a bitch or an asshole? We're looking for the consistency. And if there's a consistency in the way that we show up with ourselves that's kind and loving and understanding and at least present, just present, like, shit, this is really hard right now. And I'm not feeling good about myself, but I'm here and I'm going to stay. And I'm not going to abandon. I'm not going to reject. I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to ignore. I'm not going to neglect. Then through that consistency, we build reliability. Oh, I can rely on myself. I can rely on that person. And once we feel like we can rely because they've been consistent and we know who they are, then we can trust. That's how we build trust with another person, but also with ourselves. A lot of the times we don't trust ourselves because a lot of the times we're not being very nice to ourselves, right? Or we're just not even showing up for ourselves. We go into distraction and numbing. So getting out of duality and into there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with our humanity. Can we evolve our behavior? Absolutely. But there's nothing fundamentally wrong with your emotions. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with your thoughts and how you're feeling within your experience of being human. How you tend to those feelings and thoughts, that's where the skill comes in. That's the art of self-love and self-care. That's the art of presence and conscious awareness. And, then how we behave towards others, that is our self-responsibility, but it all has to begin with compassion. For if we're behaving badly, quote unquote, it's because there's a part of us that's hurting, that feels unseen, that doesn't feel good enough, that feels insecure, that doesn't feel lovable, whatever. Those are all the belief systems and the stories. So if we meet ourselves with compassion and we get out of the dualistic good, bad, right, wrong, positive, negative, and we can just see things as they are and hold them, that's what brings us into wholeness because we're no longer fragmenting parts of ourselves. Do you see what I mean? And that's what brings us into wholeness and compassion versus duality and judgment. And wow, what a world we would live in if we could be coming from that embodiment, from that place. Wouldn't that be amazing? Because we would still have our stuff. We would still bicker at times. We would still have conflict, but look at the way that we might resolve it. Rather than just creating more duality, more judgment, more separation, more division. And unfortunately, I will bluntly say that the quote-unquote leadership, which to me is not leadership at all, that's in this world, creates that, thrives off of that, feeds off of that. There's no interest in unity. There's interest in homogenization, which that I don't agree with. I don't think that's healthy either because, again, there's beauty in diversity. And we need to be accepting and loving and tolerating of diversity, right? True leadership, by the way, should always be led from heart. Love. How can we collaborate? How can we work together? How can we support one another? How can we embrace our differences and still work alongside each other? Any kind of quote unquote leadership that is hierarchical, that creates division, that uses violence and force and coercion and manipulation and hatred, that is not leadership. You can fill in the blank of what that is. But again, if we have to really be honest with ourselves, in what way are we reflecting that? In what way are we creating judgment and rules that say you're good if you're like, do this? That's because we're very doing based. You're good if you do and believe this. You're bad if you do and believe that. Start to pay attention to when you do that. Don't berate yourself if you do that, but notice how does it make you feel in your body, whether you're doing that to someone else or whether you're doing that to yourself. If there's any part of you that is in judgment, in hatred, really notice how does that make my body feel? And I pretty much guarantee you, even if there's a part of you that's like righteous, that's like, but I'm right, there's going to be a deeper part in your heart, in your cells, in your emotional body that goes, God, that feels pretty icky. So the work is to start doing this within yourself. And then I just think it becomes less hard to do that externally because, like I said, you just can't go into that same place of judgment and hatred because you're going to feel how painful it is to do that. And this is why I think we change the world by coming into heart and embodying love. because heart and love cannot go out there and create the same level of destruction. It just simply can't. It's not in its nature. Its nature is connected. It's relating to others. It's compassionate. It's regenerative. It's, nature that wants to live, not destroy. That is our innate essence, is we want to live and regenerate and create. We're highly creative. We don't want to destroy and kill off and it's not nice, the opposite of that. And yes, we are in a dualistic realm right now, but remember that everything wants to live and be alive. And, it's also a matter of perspective, which then, of course, affects our belief systems. But I always remember, I don't know why I use the word always all the time. I remember this documentary, I think it was The Art of Ayurveda. And it was just stating a very simple difference between the East and the West, and that Ayurveda is the art of healing. They look at healing, whereas Western medicine often looks at what is the problem, like how to avoid death rather than how to encourage healthy life. That right there to me is the difference between, I don't like going into duality, but either your glass is half full or half empty. What is a life focusing on trying not to die versus a life focusing on how to live well? Like, wow, that's a big difference. So taking on that same flavor with yourself. Don't focus on all of the things that you are just simply judging and labeling as bad or wrong. They might be uncomfortable. That's fine. Be with the discomfort. And what I find working with individuals is that when I hold the space for them and they feel safe, so that they can just stay with the uncomfortable feeling, the uncomfortable sensation, the uncomfortable emotion, that's what gets to happen. They get to just exhale for a little bit. It's a little bit more relaxed. It's a little bit more calm. And from there, that's where so much evolution can occur. And again, it's not changing you so that you're a perfect specimen. It's loving and holding all of you so that your wounded part feels loved, can seal itself up. I like the analogy that I use is that normally we're walking around with a wound that's oozing blood. You do the work, you stop the oozing. You go in and you see what is creating the oozing, right? You pull the thorn out and then you allow it to heal and to seal. Now, will you have the scar? Absolutely. That's what I mean. There's no getting rid of like, ooh, and now my skin is going to be perfect and you're going to pretend like it was never there. There will be a scar, but the scar is a thing of beauty because it's a part of who you are. And that part was never bad or wrong. It just was hurt and scared and alone and confused and didn't believe in itself and didn't believe that others loved it or thought that it mattered or was important enough. And then all of a sudden you showed up and you did the work and then you recognize, oh, wow, I do love myself. I do matter. I am important. I do belong here. And then there's no need for the wound to ooze anymore. And that arc, that journey of healing, which is really just loving. That's what healing is just loving. That arc is beautiful, and that's what makes us human. And that's what makes the soul within us grow, because there's so much growth to be had through that journey. And the journey continues, right? It doesn't ever really end. We can always learn to love ourselves more. We can always learn to show up in the embodiment and state of being of love. And sometimes we forget and we come, oh, that's okay. Sometimes we get angry. That's okay. Come back to love. And that is such an important thing in relationship, because there are times where you're going to piss each other off. There are times where you're going to hurt each other. There are times where you're going to be annoyed. And so you might shout and you might get in disagreement. But if you can come back to love, that's what will keep a relationship going. If you don't know how to come back to love, if you don't know how to come back to saying, God, wow, in that moment I was really triggered. or I was tired. I'm going to take self-responsibility. I have compassion for myself, and therefore I can take the self-responsibility to say, I'm sorry. I should have showed up better in that moment. I've really learned how to do that with my daughter. Wow, has that been a really good teaching? Because children are so innocent, you know? Taking self-responsibility becomes a beautiful thing because you feel empowered, because you feel like an adult and you feel like a human being that's like, you know what? I'm not trying to pretend that I should be perfect. I'm going to be human in moments. And so I might show up shitty in moments, but it's like rectifying them is saying, wow, I'm sorry. Yeah, in that moment, I showed up like that because this and that and the other, or maybe there was no excuse. But coming back to love, I can hold it. I'm not going into shame. I'm not going into self-blame, which then keeps me disconnected from that person, because shame and blame sure as hell ain't going to show up and say, I'm sorry, because it's going to make it feel even more ashamed. So a lot of the times people can't communicate well if they're in self-judgment and self-blame and self-shame. And if they can't communicate well, it's virtually impossible to resolve things and come back to a place of love. So building communication is also understanding how we communicate with ourselves. And so we've got to know, where's our wounding? Where are our sore spots? How do we love them? How do we take care of them? What do they need? You've heard me say it 1,000,000 times, and I'll say it 1,000,000 times again. Because as within, so without. So, yeah, just try to observe, in what ways are you being in duality within yourself? What ways are you creating judgment? In what ways are you separating parts of yourself and therefore hating parts of yourself? And how can you, instead of trying to get rid of, how can you bring these parts towards you and embrace them and love them, listen to them, alchemize them by giving them what they need, which is just love? And then watch how that naturally brings you into a state of wholeness and compassion. You don't need to try to plaster parts together to be whole. You don't need to act out like that self-love is something outside of you. Those things are naturally there when you bring parts of you towards your heart and you simply love them. That's it. Then the wholeness is there. Self-love is there. They've always been there. They never went anywhere. So food for thought. As always, take it or leave it as feels right for you, and loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.